She disappeared on a Thursday morning in May when the world was still holding its breath through the pandemic, and the streets of Nanton, Alberta felt emptier than they ever had before. Rebecca Hartwell was 38 years old, a dental hygienist, a mother of two, a woman who ran the same route every single morning for 7 years without incident, until the morning she didn't come home. May 21st, 2020, 6:45 a.m. Rebecca pulled on her running shoes, laced them tight, grabbed her phone and earbuds. She stepped out into the quiet. Her husband Graham heard the front door close while making breakfast for their daughters, heard her footsteps on gravel, heard the gate creak, heard nothing unusual at all. Tom Brennan, their neighbor across the street, saw Rebecca stretching on the sidewalk at 6:47, waved to her through his kitchen window, same as he did most mornings. She waved back, smiled, pulled her dark hair into a ponytail, started running south toward the grain elevators. An elderly woman walking her terrier spotted Rebecca near the canal path entrance around 7:05. Remembered because the dog barked and Rebecca laughed. Said something about the magpies being noisy. Then nothing. Between one breath and the next, she was gone. Vanished somewhere along the cottonwoods, somewhere between the irrigation canal and the turn that should have brought her home, somewhere in those rural roads where houses sit a quarter-mile apart and everyone knows everyone. By 8:15, Graham was calling her phone. By 8:30, he was in the car, frantically searching her route. By 9 o'clock, he stood in the RCMP detachment with terror cracking his voice because Rebecca didn't do this. She didn't forget. She didn't take spontaneous detours. She texted if she was 5 minutes late. She was the kind of person who checked locks twice and planned everything down to the minute. But she was gone, stolen in broad daylight during a pandemic when everyone was hyper-aware of every single thing around them, in a town of 2,100 people, on a route she'd run 1,000 times, and for 5 years nobody knew who took her, nobody knew where she was, nobody knew if her family would ever get answers. This is the story of how one of Alberta's most devastating cold cases finally got solved. How a mail carrier everyone trusted turned out to be a killer hiding in plain sight. And how new technology brought justice when hope had nearly died. Before we dive in, where are you watching from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop your location and the time in the comments below. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss how this case broke wide open after half a decade of silence. Rebecca Hartwell wasn't supposed to become a headline. She was supposed to grow old in Nanton, watch her daughters graduate, become a grandmother someday. She'd lived in this town her entire life, born here, went to school here, returned here after dental hygiene college in Calgary because she couldn't imagine calling anywhere else home. For 12 years, she'd worked at the only dental clinic in town, the kind of place where she knew every patient by name, knew their kids, their fears about needles and drills. She had a gift for making nervous children relax, would talk to them about hockey or school projects while she worked. Parents requested her specifically. Dr. Patel, who owned the clinic, said she was the heart of their practice. The person who made people actually want to come to the dentist. At home, she was the center of everything. Graham worked as an operations manager at a manufacturing plant in nearby Okotoks. They'd been married 15 years, built a life that was ordinary in the best possible way. 2 daughters. Olivia was 13. Claire was 10. Both girls looked like their mother. Same dark hair, same warm brown eyes, same gentle way of moving through the world, The Hartwells were the family you'd see at every school event, every hockey game, every community barbecue. Rebecca volunteered for bake sales, organized teacher appreciation weeks, showed up when people needed help. Not because she wanted recognition, just because that's who she was. The kind of person who noticed when someone was struggling and quietly did something about it. Her morning runs were sacred. She'd started running 7 years earlier after Claire was born, needed something that was just hers. 5 kilometers every weekday before work. The same route. Down Railway Avenue past the old grain elevators. West along the irrigation canal where the landscape opened up into prairie that stretched forever. Then a loop back through residential streets. She knew every crack in the sidewalk, every house, every dog that barked behind fences. The routine made her happy, made her predictable too. In May of 2020, the world had changed in ways nobody understood yet. The pandemic had turned small towns inward, made everyone hyper-aware of distance and safety and staying close to home. Nanton felt both emptier and more watchful. People noticed strangers immediately, paid attention to who belonged and who didn't. Everyone thought that made them safer, thought that level of awareness would protect them from harm. They were wrong. That Thursday morning started like every other. Graham made breakfast while Rebecca got ready for her run. The girls were still asleep. The house was quiet, except for the familiar sounds of coffee brewing and toast popping. Rebecca came downstairs in her running gear, kissed Graham, said she'd be back by 7:30, reminded him that Claire had a virtual piano lesson at 4. Normal domestic details. The kind of conversation that happens 1,000 times and means nothing until suddenly it means everything. She walked out the door at 6:45. Graham heard it close, heard her footsteps fade, went back to cracking eggs for breakfast. At 7:45, he glanced at the clock, frowned. Rebecca was never late, not by 15 minutes, not ever. By 8 o'clock, he was calling her phone. It rang and went to voicemail. By 8:15, the eggs were cold on the stove, and Graham's hands were shaking as he dialed again. By 8:30, he was in the car, driving her route, windows down, calling her name into the empty morning air. By 9 o'clock, Graham Hartwell's life had split into before and after. Before Rebecca disappeared. After the world stopped making sense. He just didn't know it yet. Didn't know that his wife was already gone, that someone had been watching her for months, that the quiet mail carrier everyone trusted had finally made his move. The Nanton RCMP detachment was quiet that Thursday morning. Constable Davies sat at his desk with paperwork and coffee. Rural policing in a pandemic meant even less happened than usual. Then Graham Hartwell walked through the door at 9:15 a.m., and Constable Davies knew immediately something was catastrophically wrong. Graham could barely get the words out. His wife, Rebecca, she went running at 6:45. She always came back by 7:30. Always. He'd driven her entire route twice, called her phone 20 times, checked the clinic, asked neighbors. She was just gone. Constable Davies reached for his radio before Graham finished talking. The response was immediate. Officers drove the canal path, knocked on doors along every street Rebecca might have traveled, questioned residents. Tom Brennan confirmed he'd seen her at 6:47, stretching on the sidewalk, looking normal, happy even. An elderly woman who'd been walking her terrier remembered seeing Rebecca near the canal entrance around 7:05. Said Rebecca had been laughing about the noisy magpies. After that, the timeline went dark. Nobody had seen anything. Nobody had heard anything. A woman had simply vanished during her morning run in a town where everyone noticed everything. Graham sat in his living room answering questions while officers searched. He was 41 years old, operations manager, married to Rebecca for 15 years, 2 daughters, Olivia, 13, Claire, 10. Both staying with Graham's sister now because how do you explain this to children? How do you tell them their mother went running and might never come home? No marital problems, Graham insisted. Voice breaking, no financial stress, no secrets. Rebecca loved her work, loved their life, loved Nanton even when people joked about how small it was. She'd been planning Claire's birthday party for next week, had presents hidden in the closet, had ordered a cake from the bakery. She had reasons to come home, every reason in the world. The RCMP pulled Rebecca's phone records. Every call accounted for. Every text was about groceries or carpool schedules or which daughter needed to be where. They examined her social media, running updates, family photos, posts about dental hygiene tips, nothing unusual, nothing hidden. Then they looked at her running watch data. Rebecca's watch synced to her phone, tracked every run she'd ever taken. That Thursday morning, the watch had recorded her route perfectly for the first 3.2 kilometers, speed consistent, heart rate normal, everything routine. Then at 7:14 a.m., the watch stopped transmitting. Not turned off, just stopped, as if she'd moved beyond cell signal or something had interfered with the connection. The last ping came from near an access road, a rarely used gravel path that led toward Crown Land. That's where the trail ended. By afternoon, search and rescue teams arrived from Lethbridge with dogs. The dogs sniffed Rebecca's pillow, her running jacket, the shoes she'd worn the day before. They pulled, their handlers south toward the canal with focused determination, worked the path methodically, noses low, tails serious. 3 kilometers down the trail near where the township road intersected with that access road, the dogs circled, whined, lost the scent completely. Something had happened here. Someone had been waiting here. The dogs couldn't say more. They only knew Rebecca's trail ended on that stretch of gravel between fields of emerging wheat. By evening, the search had expanded to cover 8 square kilometers. Volunteers assembled at the community center. Everyone came. The clinic where Rebecca worked. Teachers from the girls' school. Hockey parents who'd sat with Graham and Rebecca through 100 cold arena mornings. People who'd had their teeth cleaned by her steady hands. Who'd trusted her with their anxious children. Who'd seen her at the grocery store or the gas station and exchanged small-town pleasantries that meant everything and nothing. Nanton's volunteer fire department brought lights, turned the canal path into something surreal, harsh brightness against gathering darkness, desperate faces calling Rebecca's name until their voices scraped raw. They checked every culvert, every shelter belt, every abandoned barn and equipment shed. The town's 3 churches opened their doors, offered coffee and coordination. They found nothing. No phone dropped in panic. No shoe caught on barbed wire. No sign of struggle. The canal flowed clear and indifferent. The field stretched empty to the horizon, and Rebecca Hartwell was simply gone, as if the prairie had opened up and swallowed her between one breath and the next. Here's what I want to know from you. Do you think small towns are actually safer, or do we just assume they are because we recognize faces? Drop your thoughts in the comments because what happened in Nanton challenges everything people believe about community and safety. The search continued through the night, through the next day, through the weekend, But deep down, everyone was starting to understand what Graham couldn't accept yet. Rebecca hadn't collapsed somewhere, hadn't wandered off confused, hadn't had an accident. Someone had taken her, deliberately, carefully, and they'd done it in broad daylight while an entire town was watching. Detective Andrea Walsh arrived from the Calgary RCMP Major Crimes Unit by noon Friday. 16 years of experience. A worn notebook she filled with tight observations. A reputation for solving cases that seemed impossible. She sat across from Graham in his living room while Olivia and Claire stayed upstairs with his sister. The girls kept checking their phones, kept hoping for a text from their mother that would never come. Walsh asked the necessary questions, the uncomfortable ones. Had Rebecca seemed depressed lately? Was she taking any medication? Had there been changes in her behavior, her sleep, her appetite? Graham answered with increasing frustration. No. Rebecca was fine. She was happy. She loved her work. She loved their life together. Walsh nodded, made notes, asked about finances. Graham brought out bank statements, credit card records, showed her their modest savings, their paid-off mortgage. The orderly columns of numbers that revealed a life lived within means. No secrets, no hidden debts, no desperate need for money that might explain running away. She pulled Rebecca's phone records for the past 6 months. Every call accounted for, mostly to Graham, to her sister in Medicine Hat, to co-workers confirming clinic schedules. Nothing suspicious, nothing unusual. Just the digital footprint of an ordinary life. Walsh interviewed Rebecca's colleagues next. Linda Fraser, the clinic director, sat in the staff break room with red eyes, spoke of Rebecca's dedication, her patience with difficult patients, her talent for making people feel heard. She'd worked at the clinic for 12 years, never missed a shift without calling, never complained even when budget cuts threatened her hours. Margaret O'Connor, who worked the circulation desk, described Rebecca as warm but reserved. Someone who listened more than she spoke, who remembered details about regular patients and asked about their families. Nobody knew of any conflicts. Nobody recalled any threatening incidents, any patients who'd become inappropriate or obsessive. The library was quiet, Margaret said. A safe place in a safe town. Nothing bad happened there, but something bad had happened. Walsh just couldn't figure out what. She walked Rebecca's route herself, timed each segment, noted sightlines and blind spots. For the first 3 kilometers, the path was relatively exposed, visible from several farmhouses and the highway. But past the 3-kilometer mark, where the route veered closer to the canal, the cottonwoods grew thick. The nearest house sat almost half a kilometer away. Early morning in May meant full daylight by 6:45, but it also meant solitude. Most farmers were at breakfast. Most of Nanton was still waking up. Someone waiting in the right spot with the right timing could have had minutes of privacy. Minutes that were all they needed. The investigation expanded outward. They interviewed everyone within 10 kilometers of Rebecca's route. Found nothing. Her life was exactly what it appeared to be. Work and family and community. Contained entirely within the boundaries of Nanton and the daily rhythms of small-town life. Walsh requested security camera footage from every property that might have captured something. Most rural homes didn't have cameras in 2020, but a few did. The co-op gas station at the edge of town, 2 farms along the access road, a residence near the canal. The footage came in. Walsh spent hours reviewing every frame. Most showed empty roads, occasional vehicles, The mundane traffic of rural Alberta mornings. Nothing connected to Rebecca's disappearance. Nothing that explained what happened at 7:14 a.m. when her watch stopped transmitting. The technology had limits. The footage was grainy, low resolution, cameras positioned to watch property, not roads. License plates were blurred. Faces were indistinct. Vehicle colors were hard to determine. Walsh made notes, preserved everything, but the footage offered no immediate answers. The watch data remained their strongest lead, and it wasn't much. Rebecca had been near that access road at 7:14. Then her signal vanished. The dogs had lost her scent there. Someone had been waiting. But who? And how did they know she'd be there at that exact time? Walsh interviewed the paper boy, a local farmer who'd been working nearby, a truck driver who'd passed through town that morning. Everyone had alibis. Everyone seemed genuine. Nobody raised red flags. Weeks passed. The massive search operation scaled down. The volunteers went back to their lives. The media coverage faded. Walsh returned to her office in Calgary with a file full of dead ends and a feeling that gnawed at her constantly. She'd missed something. They'd all missed something. But what? The case had no secrets to expose, no hidden affairs, no financial crimes, no vengeful ex-lovers. Rebecca's life was an open book, and that book revealed nothing except a woman who'd been loved by everyone who knew her. By the 8-week mark, Walsh had to accept the truth, without new evidence, without witnesses, without physical remains. Without any clear motive or suspect, the investigation had nowhere left to go. She told Graham this gently, sitting once more in his living room, explaining that the case would remain open, that any new information would be pursued immediately, that she would never stop thinking about Rebecca. Graham heard what she wasn't quite saying, that Rebecca was almost certainly dead, that whoever took her had planned it carefully. That hope was becoming cruelty. The investigation had failed. They'd done everything right and still failed completely. The investigation remained technically active, but in practical terms it stopped. There was nowhere left to look, no threads left to pull. Rebecca Hartwell had become what Detective Walsh feared most. Another cold case, another unsolved disappearance, another file in a cabinet representing someone's entire world reduced to paper and unanswered questions. The clinic held a memorial in July. Graham refused to call it a funeral, refused to accept that Rebecca was gone for good. The community filled the high school gym despite pandemic protocols, stood shoulder to shoulder because grief was bigger than fear. People shared memories. Rebecca's kindness, her laugh, her patience with nervous children. Olivia and Claire sat between Graham and his sister, small and silent, trying to understand how a person could be there one day and erase the next, how the world could be this fundamentally unfair. Afterward, people kept their distance, unsure what to say to a family frozen in the worst kind of waiting. Graham aged in ways that had nothing to do with time. His face grew gaunt. His eyes took on the distant quality of someone perpetually searching for something that would never appear. He kept working, kept making breakfast and packing lunches, kept showing up to Olivia's volleyball games and Claire's piano recitals, kept functioning because his daughters needed him to. But the man who'd laughed easily, who'd coached kids' hockey and organized neighborhood barbecues was gone. What remained was hollow, going through motions, existing but not living. Olivia grew quieter, more serious, developed anxiety about doors and locks and knowing where people were at all times, needed constant reassurance, Couldn't sleep without checking that her father was still in the house. Claire retreated into books, into worlds where she had control, where mothers didn't vanish between heartbeats. She stopped talking about Rebecca, stopped asking when she was coming home, just went silent in a way that terrified Graham more than questions would have. Every May on the anniversary, Graham organized a search. Olivia and Claire walked with him through the same fields, the same canal path that had swallowed their mother. The volunteers dwindled year by year. Linda from the clinic always came. Tom Brennan from across the street. The pastor from their church. A handful of faithful souls. But the crowds that had turned out in 2020 were gone. Most of Nanton had moved on, filed Rebecca's disappearance under tragedy, and tried not to think about it. People were tired of sadness, tired of mysteries without solutions, tired of being reminded that safety was an illusion. Graham maintained a Facebook page, posted Rebecca's photo every week, asked for tips, begged for information. The posts received fewer interactions as time passed. Friends and family who'd once commented regularly now scrolled past, unsure what to say, exhausted by the endless vigil. Graham understood. Grief had a shelf life for everyone except those who'd lost someone. People needed to believe the world made sense, that bad things didn't happen to good people in broad daylight. Rebecca's continued absence challenged that belief, made everyone uncomfortable. The town changed in subtle ways. Parents who'd once let their children walk to school alone now drove them. Women who jogged alone began carrying bear spray, running in groups, changing routes constantly. The disappearance had cracked something in the community's sense of security, a persistent unease that never quite faded. People didn't talk about it directly, but it informed their choices, their cautions, their warnings to loved ones. Be careful, stay aware. Don't assume you're safe just because you've always been safe before. Rebecca Hartwell's absence had become permanent, as real and unchanging as the mountains visible to the west. The case was cold, hope was fading, and somewhere out there, the person who'd taken her was living free, walking the same streets, shopping at the same stores, hiding behind a mask of normalcy that nobody thought to question. But cold cases don't always stay cold. Sometimes technology advances. Sometimes investigators refuse to give up. Sometimes justice takes years, but it comes. And Rebecca's case was about to prove that. In November 2024, Detective Marcus Bennett transferred to the Alberta RCMP Historical Homicide Unit in Edmonton. At 47 years old, after 2 decades of active investigation, he'd specifically requested cold case assignment. The unsolved ones followed him home, kept him awake. He couldn't tolerate the idea of victims becoming statistics, of families living in permanent limbo, of killers walking free because initial investigations had exhausted their leads. Rebecca Hartwell's file reached his desk in December, one of 43 unsolved missing persons cases in southern Alberta dating back to 2015. Bennett read through everything over a long weekend, absorbed timelines, witness statements, the thorough work Detective Walsh had done. What caught his attention was buried in supplementary reports. During the initial investigation, local RCMP had requested footage from every security camera within 10 kilometers of Rebecca's route. Most rural properties didn't have cameras in 2020, but a few did. The Co-op gas station, 2 farms along the access road, a residence near the canal. The footage had been reviewed, showed nothing obviously relevant, had been preserved on hard drives in evidence storage. Bennett knew something Walsh hadn't in 2020. Video analysis technology had advanced dramatically in 4 years. What seemed like useless footage then might yield something now. Enhancement software could extract details from poor quality images, clarify license plates that appeared as blur, sharpen faces obscured by distance or low light. He submitted the files to a specialized forensic lab in Ottawa. The process took 6 weeks. When results came back in late January, Bennett spent 2 days reviewing every frame. Most showed exactly what the original investigation had documented: empty roads, occasional vehicles, the mundane traffic of rural Alberta mornings. Then in footage from a farm security camera positioned to watch an equipment yard, but angled such that it caught a portion of the access road, Bennett saw something that made his pulse quicken. A dark green SUV appeared in frame at 7:02 a.m. on May 21, 2020, the day Rebecca disappeared. The vehicle pulled onto the access road, drove slowly out of frame toward where the road dead-ended at Crown Land. 3 minutes later, at 7:05, the same vehicle returned, driving faster, pulled back onto the highway heading north. The timestamp aligned almost exactly with when Rebecca's watch had stopped transmitting at 7:14 a.m. The enhancement lab had worked magic, pulled detail from pixels that had seemed like nothing. The license plate was partially visible now, enough to run through databases. The SUV was a 2016 Honda CR-V, forest green, registered to a Nanton resident named Trevor Donovan. Bennett felt electricity in his gut, that sensation that said this mattered. He ran Trevor Donovan through every system available: criminal history, employment records, financial data. What came back was frustratingly unremarkable. 43 years old, worked as a rural mail carrier for Canada Post, divorced 6 years ago, lived alone in a small house on the north edge of Nanton. No criminal record, no restraining orders, no red flags anywhere. On paper, Trevor Donovan was exactly what he seemed: an ordinary man with an ordinary life. But that SUV on that access road at that specific time wasn't ordinary. That was deliberate. Bennett pulled everything he could find about connections between Donovan and Rebecca. Had they known each other? Had Donovan been a patient at her clinic? Had their paths crossed in ways that might explain this? The original investigation files made no mention of Donovan. He hadn't been interviewed in 2020, hadn't appeared on any witness list, hadn't volunteered for searches. He'd been invisible, just another face in a small town where everyone sort of knew everyone, but nobody paid close attention to the quiet ones who kept to themselves. Bennett pulled Donovan's mail route. His hands tightened on the file when he saw it. The route included the street where Rebecca and Graham lived, included the clinic where she worked. Donovan would have seen her regularly, would have known her schedule, her patterns, her routine, the mail carrier, the person so familiar nobody noticed him anymore, the one who had access to addresses and daily rhythms, and who was home when. Bennett leaned back in his chair, stared at Trevor Donovan's driver's license photo. An unremarkable face, thinning hair, neutral expression. The kind of person you'd pass on the street and forget immediately. The kind of person who could watch and wait and plan without anyone suspecting a thing. Bennett reached for his phone. They needed warrants. They needed to dig into Trevor Donovan's life. And they needed to do it carefully, because if Donovan suspected he was being watched, he might run, might destroy evidence, might do anything to protect the secret he'd kept for 4.5 years. The case wasn't cold anymore. It was about to break wide open, Bennett obtained warrants for Donovan's financial records, phone data, internet history. He had to fight for that last one. Convince a skeptical judge that the SUV footage was enough to justify digging deeper. What emerged was a portrait of profound isolation. Donovan's bank statements showed minimal activity, paycheck deposited, bills paid, groceries and gas purchased. Nothing unusual, no large withdrawals around the time Rebecca disappeared. His phone records revealed almost no calls, no texts beyond work-related messages. A man who existed in near complete solitude. His internet history was different. Hours spent on local news sites, specifically articles about Rebecca's disappearance. He'd bookmarked the Find Rebecca Hartwell Facebook page Graham had created, never liked or commented on anything, just watched. He'd saved every news article, created folders on his desktop, organized by date, hundreds of files documenting every detail of the case. More troubling were the deleted files. Forensic technicians recovered them from Donovan's hard drive. Photos of Rebecca captured through zoom lens. Grainy images of her running, taken from a distance over several weeks before she disappeared. Screenshots of her social media profiles, posts she'd shared about her running times, her routes, her marathon training schedule. Donovan had been watching, learning, preparing. The technical team found something else. Search history from May 20th, 2020. The day before Rebecca vanished. Searches for how long until someone is declared dead in Alberta. What evidence do police need for murder charges? Areas with no cell service near Nanton. Bennett felt cold reading through the logs. This wasn't an accident waiting to happen. This was planning. Deliberate. Methodical. They placed Donovan under surveillance. 3 officers who specialized in monitoring suspects without detection. They watched him for 3 weeks, documented his routines, his movements, his life of rigid predictability. Every morning Donovan rose at 5 a.m., made coffee, drove his mail route with mechanical precision. He spoke to no one beyond brief exchanges required by his job. He shopped alone at the co-op every Sunday, bought the same items, made no eye contact, and every single day he ate lunch in his vehicle parked at the same spot. Near the canal, the exact location where Rebecca's watch had stopped transmitting, where the dogs had lost her scent. Donovan sat there for exactly 15 minutes, ate his sandwich, stared at the cottonwoods, then continued his route. 4.5 years later, he was still returning to the place where he'd taken her. Bennett consulted with a forensic psychologist, showed her the behavioral patterns, the daily visits to that spot, the obsessive monitoring of news coverage, the isolation and lack of social connections. Her assessment came back clear. This was consistent with someone experiencing guilt, someone unable to let go of what he'd done. She noted that male carriers often became invisible to communities. People saw them daily, but rarely really noticed them. They had access to personal information through mail delivery, understood routines and vulnerabilities. Donovan would have had every opportunity to fixate on Rebecca without anyone recognizing it as threatening. Bennett assembled his team, reviewed everything one more time: the SUV footage, the deleted photos, the search history, the daily visits to where Rebecca had last been seen. The pieces had finally connected into something solid, something prosecutable. They had enough for an arrest. But here's what I need you to think about. The mail carrier, the person who delivers to your house every day, the neighbor you wave to but never really talk to, the face you see so often you stop actually seeing it. How well do you really know the people around you? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because what happened in Nanton should make all of us question who we trust and why. Trevor Donovan had hidden in plain sight for 4.5 years, walking the same streets, delivering the same mail, living among the people whose lives he'd destroyed. That was about to end. They came for Trevor Donovan on a Thursday morning in March 2025. 5 years, almost to the day, after Rebecca Hartwell disappeared. Bennett had chosen the timing deliberately, wanted Donovan thinking about anniversaries, about patterns, about how long he'd been carrying this secret. The arrest team arrived at his house at 6 a.m., found him already awake, sitting at his kitchen table with coffee and a newspaper. When Bennett identified himself, explained they had questions about Rebecca Hartwell, Donovan's face did something strange. It crumpled, like someone who'd been holding their breath for years and finally had permission to exhale. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't demand to know what this was about. Just nodded, asked if he could put on his boots, complied when they said he needed to come immediately. In the car, he sat in the back seat, stared out the window at the town passing by. Street still quiet in the early morning light, said nothing at all. The interview room at the Nanton RCMP detachment was small and overheated, metal table, chairs bolted to the floor. Bennett sat across from Donovan with recording equipment visible between them. Corporal Hughes stood near the door, watching, reading body language. Bennett started with basics, establishing timeline, getting Donovan's account of May 21st, 2020. Donovan spoke quietly, said he remembered that day, remembered the panic in town when Rebecca went missing, remembered feeling sorry for her family. Then Bennett placed the enhanced security footage on the table. Images showing Donovan's green CR-V on the access road at 7:02 a.m. Donovan stared at the photos for a long time. His hands began to shake. He tried to explain, said he'd been checking his mail route, said he sometimes drove that access road to look for deer, said it was probably just coincidence. His voice lacked conviction. Bennett asked about the photos on Donovan's computer, about the searches, about the fact that he visited the exact spot where Rebecca had last been seen every single day for 5 years. Donovan's composure shattered. He put his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He said he'd never meant for any of it to happen, that he'd only wanted to talk to her. The confession came slowly, painfully. Donovan admitted he'd noticed Rebecca running, thought she was beautiful, started planning his mail route to coincide with her runs, began taking photos, convinced himself they had some kind of connection, that maybe if he talked to her, she'd understand. He'd planned it carefully. That Thursday morning, taken a sick day from work, waited on the access road knowing she'd run past. He'd brought rope, duct tape, had them in his vehicle. Just in case she didn't want to talk, he said. Just in case he needed to convince her to listen. When Rebecca appeared at 7:05, he stepped out from beside his vehicle. Tried to speak to her, but Rebecca had been frightened, started to back away. He'd grabbed her arm. She'd fought, pulled free, started to scream. Donovan said he panicked, covered her mouth, dragged her to his SUV. She struggled so hard, kicked, clawed at his hands. He'd had to hit her, had to make her stop, had to use the rope to restrain her. He drove to Crown Land north of Nanton, an area he knew from hunting, areas where no one went anymore, remote, hidden. He said Rebecca had been begging, crying, asking about her daughters, about Graham, promising she wouldn't tell anyone if he just let her go. But Donovan knew she would tell, knew his life was over if he released her. So he finished what he'd started, used his hands, held on until she stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped being a person and became a problem he needed to hide. He'd buried her in a ravine, covered her with rocks and deadfall and dirt, taken her phone and watch, smashed them, scattered the pieces across miles of prairie, drove home, showered, went to work the next day as if nothing had changed. The rope and duct tape proved it wasn't panic. The sick day proved premeditation. The choice of location proved he'd planned where to take her. This wasn't an accident. This was murder, calculated, deliberate. Donovan claimed he'd wanted to confess so many times, had written letters to police he'd never sent, had stood outside the RCMP detachment and couldn't make himself go in. He said he was relieved it was finally over. Bennett heard no remorse in his voice, only relief that the pretending could stop. The recovery operation began the following day. Forensic teams accompanied by Donovan in shackles drove into the foothills north of Nanton, following his directions, down logging roads that hadn't been maintained in decades, roads that were barely roads anymore. The terrain was exactly as he described it, remote, heavily treed, the kind of place where you could scream and nobody would hear you. They found the ravine by afternoon, found the rocks arranged in a way that looked almost natural, until you knew to look closer. The excavation took hours, every layer photographed, every movement documented, treating Rebecca with the dignity she'd been denied 5 years ago. They found her 4 feet down, wrapped in a tarp that had mostly disintegrated, skeletal remains that the medical examiner would later confirm through dental records. Rebecca Hartwell, 38 years old, dental hygienist, mother of 2, stolen from a morning run and buried like something disposable. Graham received the news sitting in the same living room where he'd reported Rebecca missing 5 years earlier. Olivia and Claire were with him, both young women now, 18 and 15, both bracing for what they already knew in their hearts. Corporal Hughes delivered the information quietly, respectfully, explained what Donovan had confessed, where Rebecca had been found, what would happen next. The grief that tore through that room was both new and ancient, the final destruction of any remaining hope, but also terrible relief. They could stop waiting now, stop wondering, stop living in the purgatory of not knowing. Graham broke 5 years of holding himself together for his daughters, 5 years of being strong. It shattered in one moment. He sobbed in a way his daughters had never seen, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep it sounds like drowning. Olivia held her father. Claire held her sister. The 3 of them tangled together in shared loss, finally able to grieve properly, finally able to say goodbye. Rebecca was gone, had been gone since that Thursday morning in May 2020. But now they could bring her home, could bury her properly, could visit a grave instead of searching empty fields every anniversary. The medical examiner's report confirmed what Donovan had admitted. Cause of death was asphyxiation, manual strangulation. She'd also suffered blunt force trauma to the head, defensive wounds on her arm bones, evidence she'd fought desperately, tried everything to survive, to get back to her family. But Donovan had been stronger, had been determined, had planned for exactly this scenario. Rebecca had died knowing nobody was coming to save her, died begging a stranger to think about her daughters, died alone and terrified in a place she'd never been, stolen from a world that desperately needed people like her. The case that had haunted Nanton for 5 years finally had its answer, the worst possible answer, but an answer nonetheless. Now came justice. Trevor Donovan was charged with first-degree murder. The trial, held 9 months later in the fall of 2025, revealed the full extent of his obsession in ways that horrified everyone who'd known him. Prosecutors presented the deleted photos, hundreds of images spanning months. Rebecca running, Rebecca stretching, Rebecca walking to her car after work, surveillance that bordered on stalking, images taken from distance with zoom lens, a record of watching that nobody had noticed. They presented his search history, the planning, the questions about how long until someone is declared dead, what evidence police need, areas without cell signal, proof that this wasn't an accident, wasn't a moment of panic. This was premeditated murder. They presented the rope and duct tape found in his vehicle during the arrest, items he'd kept for 5 years, physical evidence of preparation. The forensic psychologist testified about Donovan's isolation, his lack of social connections, the way mail carriers became invisible to communities, how he'd used that invisibility to watch Rebecca without anyone recognizing the threat. Donovan's defense tried to argue diminished capacity, claimed he'd been suffering from untreated mental illness, that his obsession had clouded his judgment, that he hadn't fully understood what he was doing. The jury didn't buy it. They saw the planning, the sick day taken specifically for this purpose, the choice of location, the way he'd hidden evidence, returned to work the next day, lived normally for 5 years while a family suffered. They deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Donovan to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. At 44 years old, he'd be nearly 70 before even being considered for release. Effectively a life sentence. Graham sat in the courtroom and felt nothing, no satisfaction, no relief, just emptiness. Justice didn't bring Rebecca back, didn't undo 5 years of torture, didn't heal his daughters. It was simply the end of one chapter in a story that would never really be over. Nanton struggled to process what it meant, that one of their own had done this. The man who'd delivered their mail for years, who'd waved from his truck, who'd seemed so quiet and harmless, who'd attended the memorial for Rebecca and said nothing while her family grieved. He'd murdered a woman everyone loved, had hidden her body for 5 years, had lived among them with that secret, had shopped at the same stores, walked the same streets, existed behind a mask so convincing that nobody had thought to look closer. The town would never feel quite the same, would never trust appearances the way they once had, would always wonder what other secrets people carried, what other darkness hid behind ordinary faces. The realization was devastating. Evil didn't announce itself, didn't look like what people expected, could wear the face of someone utterly ordinary right up until the moment it revealed itself. Graham eventually sold the house on 6th Avenue. Too many memories, too much pain in every room. He moved with Olivia and Claire to Calgary, where anonymity felt like mercy, where they could grieve without an entire town watching, where they could try to rebuild some version of normal life. Nanton erected a memorial bench along the canal path where Rebecca used to run, a simple plaque that read, Rebecca Hartwell, 1982-2020. Beloved mother-wife friend, may her memory guide us home. Runners left flowers there sometimes, left water bottles, small offerings to a woman who'd loved the prairie mornings, who died doing something that should have been safe, who'd been stolen from a world that desperately needed people like her. The field stretched on forever, indifferent to human grief, to human cruelty, to the way one Thursday morning in May had changed everything for everyone who'd loved her, while the man who'd taken her sat in a cell. Finally, after 5 years of pretending, finally facing what he'd done, Rebecca Hartwell's case proved something terrifying. Predators don't look like monsters. They look like the mail carrier, the neighbor, the quiet person you see every day and never really notice. They hide in plain sight, use familiarity as camouflage, count on our assumption that ordinary means safe. It took Detective Marcus Bennett's refusal to let this case die, his belief that every victim deserves answers, that 5 years doesn't mean forgotten, that justice delayed isn't justice denied. It took technology that didn't exist in 2020, video enhancement that turned useless footage into evidence, digital forensics that recovered deleted files, proof that cold cases can get warm again if someone refuses to give up. To Graham, Olivia, and Claire, 5 years of not knowing became 5 years of nightmare confirmed. But you survived. You held together. You never stopped fighting for Rebecca. And finally, you got answers. Finally, you could lay her to rest. That strength deserves recognition. If this case affected you, if you believe every victim deserves justice, no matter how long it takes, hit that like button. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts on how we can better protect our communities. Share this video so Rebecca's story reaches people who need to hear it. And subscribe because we're committed to covering cases that matter. Cases where families are still waiting, still hoping. Rebecca Hartwell was 38 years old, a mother, a healer, a woman who made people smile while cleaning their teeth. She deserved to grow old, to watch her daughters graduate, to become a grandmother. She deserved better than what Trevor Donovan took from her. But her story won't be forgotten, and neither will the lesson. Stay aware, trust your instincts, and never assume that familiar means safe. Because sometimes the most dangerous person is the one you never thought to fear.